Hi, this is Paige Pradko with Therapy for a Better Life. This is the fourth video in our series on feeling better. This video is called Noticing Our Negative Thoughts, Labeling It, and Replacing those thoughts with more helpful and realistic ones. If you'd like to go to the beginning of our series on feeling better, please click here. This is a very mini series or example of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Aaron Beck was the pioneer of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, in the 1960s. I was trained by David Burns, who wrote the book Feeling Good, and I've been to several of his workshops, especially early on when I was beginning as a therapist. And I used some of David Burns' techniques. I also used a little bit more what we call the next tier of cognitive behavioral therapy. I use ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, techniques by Stephen Hayes, and also some techniques from DBT, dialectic behavioral therapy by Marsha Linehan. Kind of a combination of all of those. But today we're going to use just very traditional CBT. It's one of David Burns' methods, and we're just identifying the negative thought, we're labeling it, and we're replacing it with something more helpful. Now, when we're actually labeling a thought, even if we just do that, even if we just label a thought, we're bringing the thought up to the cognitive frontal lobe, frontal lobe of our brain, so we begin to not react to it as emotionally. And we begin to work at it as even problem solving. So even just labeling what you're doing, how you're distorting your thought, is going to be helpful. So the first thing we do, like I said, is we notice. We have to notice what we're telling ourselves, what our thoughts are. We especially have to notice if it's a negative thought so that we can do some work on it. And then label how we are distorting that thought. We can call it whatever we want. There's a few specific labels I use. And then we have to replace it, and we tell ourselves something a little bit more helpful to replace that negative thought. There's actually research that even if we don't believe our more helpful suggestion, our more helpful interpretation of the thought, that it actually changes our mood. And that's what cognitive behavior therapy is all about, that it believes that theorizes that our thoughts affect our mood and affect our behaviors. And so if we can change the thought, then we're going to change our behaviors to have more helpful behaviors, and we're going to change our emotions, which means we're going to be in a better mood. So let me give you an example. One of my clients is a physician, and he came in and talked about that he was feeling down because he was taking his residents around the floor, doing rounds, and his residents were all yawning. And his mind interpreted that they weren't interested, they didn't like him, they were bored, and we had to pick it apart a little bit. I had him write it down. Then I said, what are you doing here? How are you distorting your thoughts? How are you distorting reality here? And I got him to talking about how he remembered when he was a resident, he was always tired. He was always exhausted. So much is expected of them, and they get very little sleep. And he realized that he was taking the simple fact that the residents are exhausted, and he was making a distortion, and he was doing what's called mind reading. A lot of us do that. And mind reading is we assume this very negative interpretation even when we don't know the facts. We're just, assuming it. And so when I got him to talking and reminding himself that he has no evidence that they don't like him, his only evidence is he actually remembered that he was always exhausted as a resident. And so he did end up, replacing his thought with residents are tired, and if I see them yawning, maybe I'll shorten up the rounds a little bit, use humor, lighten things up a little bit, but not internalize that as something negative toward me. They are going to be yawning no matter who is talking to them. So I hope that this gave you a little bit of an idea of how we use cognitive behavioral therapy. We identify the negative thought, we label it. What am I doing? Oh my gosh, I'm mind reading again. And then what's something more helpful I can say to myself to replace that? And the more that we go through that process in our mind, the more our brain is eventually going to go right to the positive thought. So I encourage you to try this technique. There are lots of logs that you can use that I'm sure are online and available, or make your own. So you begin with writing it all down, but eventually you just do it in your mind. I hope that you enjoyed this video or got something out of it. And our next video in the series is learning to tolerate self-esteem collapse. That sounds like fun, doesn't it? But it's a good video, and click here to watch the next video in this series. And if you'd like to subscribe to my channel and learn more about mental health topics, please click subscribe here. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you next time.